Hard to believe it's been 15 years since the last of the Pittsburgh Steelers' 6 Super Bowl titles, but it has been. 2008. Of course, you remember Ben Roethlisberger, Santonio Holmes, that final drive, the toe tap in the corner of the end zone in Tampa against the Arizona Cardinals to win Super Bowl 43. But what about the path that got that team to that moment? As a Steelers fan, you know it was driven by the defense many times, and the 2008 team, no different than some of the other of the Steelers' 6 Super Bowl titles. It was driven by defense. It was driven by guys like Troy Polamalu and the pick six against the Ravens in the AFC Championship game. Ryan Clark and the huge hit on Willis McGahee that same evening at Heinz Field. And so many other important pieces. James Harrison, James Ferrier, Casey Hampton. We can go down the list. Ike Taylor, all the names that were a part of that great defense. And we will do that this fall during what we will call Oh Momma, a look back at the 2008 black and gold defense presented by South Hills Kia. All those great names from that defense. You remember the magazine covers with all of them standing there around each other. The family-type atmosphere that they have. These guys still share a group text to this day where they all keep in touch with each other. And who better to kick this thing off and get us started down this path than one of the architects of it, the legendary Pro Football Hall of Famer, 3-time Pro Bowler, 1957 national champion. We got to throw that in as well, from the Ohio State, and 2-time Super Bowl champion defensive coordinator, Dick LeBeau. Coach, I'm so appreciative of you taking the time to sit down and talk about this 2008 team, and I can't believe it's been 15 years already.
Yeah, that's an amazing stat right there. But it's always good to talk about the guys, and particularly that team. They were so special, and thank you for that introduction. That was a little more than I deserved.
No, well, see, I find that everybody's background comes together to make this team what it was and how it was so special and how the guys came together under you, under Mike Tomlin, and under the organization. So before we dive into your group of guys, and I know you want to talk about them more than you want to talk about yourself, I do want to go back to, a little west of Columbus, the 1950s, London, Ohio. What caused Dick LeBeau to fall in love with football and launch your trajectory throughout this multi-decade career, both playing and coaching?
Well, I grew up in a very sports-orientated family. My dad was an active golfer, and my brother played all sports, and I was the younger brother. And London is it's the county seat of Madison County. It's a bustling metropolis of, then it was about 7,000 people. I suppose they got about 10 now. It was historically a football town. When the high school would play on Friday nights, you couldn't do any shopping downtown because everything was closed and everybody went to the football game. And it was always standing room people only at the games, which was, for a small child going there, it was pretty impressive. But I grew up in that type of environment. I've always liked sports. And when I was a young fella, we were outdoors more than the kids are today. We didn't have all the electronic sidebars that they have today to keep them in front of the TV set. So we were always outside. Whatever season it was, that was the sport we were playing. And we got an affection for athletic competition. And it was just, I would say, very much in common with 90% of my town that I grew up in, and my family was 100%.
So then when you grow up just a little west, about almost halfway between Columbus and Dayton, and you end up going to Ohio State to play for the legendary, even then, only about half a dozen years into his career, he was already legendary, Woody Hayes, and Lyle Clark as the big-name defensive coordinator. What is that like to go there, play there, be part of a national championship team in 1957 that only gives up, I think, 92 points in 10 games?
Yeah, if they got more than 7, they were having a great day against us. We were very much a ground and pound team, and we possessed the ball a lot. Not totally dissimilar with some of our better defenses with the Steelers, too. and the great running backs that we had. And, of course, we had the great quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger. But Ohio State, in those days, actually, when I played, it was still single platoon football.
Mm-hmm.
The NCAA or the powers that be did not want to or wish to compete or be likened with the National Football League, which was a total exchange of offense and defensive players with each possession. And so they passed a bunch of rules that limited the amount of time you could substitute for a particular player, which essentially guaranteed that you would be playing. I think my senior year, there were about 5 of us that averaged 57 minutes a game in a 60-minute football game. So it was, but we didn't want to come out of the game. We had to work so daggone hard to make the team and to get into a starting lineup situation. You just wanted to play because we had, the scholarship limitations weren't what they were today. So there was a lot of gifted, talented players who were sitting on the sideline and waiting for a chance to get in the game. So you didn't want to come back out.
Right.
You wanted to keep your position. But London is, 20 miles from Ohio Stadium and about 25 miles from Springfield. And my uncle would take me to an Ohio State football game every now and then, but it's still a spectacle. It was then, it is now. It's like any great university that plays on Saturday afternoon. You go to a game, you've had a life experience. And Ohio is a little bit different because Ohio State is only the only one big school, In most states you have at least 2, Michigan State, Indiana,
Purdue,
Notre Dame.
Yeah.
You can go on and on. But if you're a resident of Ohio, you're probably an Ohio State fan. So when you grow up in the backyard or the post office yard playing ball outdoors, you dreamed of playing for Ohio State. So it was a dream come true for me athletically.
You get drafted by the Browns, but then that first training camp, you get cut. And it strikes me, Coach LeBeau, that might be some sort of connection that you have with a lot of players who have ended up being great that you coached later on. In particular, a guy like James Harrison. Is there something that happens in your head when you get cut from an NFL training camp that you then take with you? I don't want to call it a chip on the shoulder, but a need to prove yourself throughout the rest of your career.
I wouldn't describe it that way. It's an awareness of the facts of life, I would say. My first year, the only team in Ohio, a professional team in Ohio, was the Cleveland Browns. And again, being a sports family that I grew up in, we couldn't really get the Cleveland radio station where our house was located. It would fade in and out. So we would get in our automobile and drive around in the outskirts of town where the reception was better and listen to the Cleveland Browns play football. And they played in the old All-American Conference for 3 years, and then they went into the NFL. We would listen to them every Sunday. And that, of course, was along with the dream of playing for Ohio State, was the dream of playing for the Cleveland Browns. So it was a staggering experience when I got there. The roster sizes were 31 players at that time.
Wow.
There weren't any specialists. Everybody that kicked or caught punts or held for extra points or kicked off or kicked field goals or, as I said, punted, they all had to play another position because there just wasn't room on the roster. And the total DBs playing for each franchise was 5. And there were 12 teams as all there were in the NFL. So there were 60 guys in the world making a living playing defensive back. It was very competitive, let's say at the very least. But I had a pretty good training camp, I thought. And it was the first experience in my life athletically where anyone ever said, "We don't want you."
Well,
when they were picking out in the schoolyard, I was one of the first guys picked to get, on the basketball team. But that part of it, I can remember, I guess you got to make a decision whether, you don't know exactly what you're going to do when you go through college. You think you do, you take your education. I decided I was going to give myself every chance that I could to continue playing football. I thought I could. And in those days, they had what they called taxi squads. Each team kept some guys because of the limited number of players. There wasn't any development squad like they have today. Mm-hmm. They would keep 4 or 5 guys around to learn different positions so that if they did get injuries, which invariably they would, they had someone on the team that knew the offense, knew the defense, and could step in and keep the process going. So I was contacted by several teams. There was a 48-hour waiver period in there. You had to clear waivers. And after that, teams started calling me about coming in and being on their team in a practice squad position. So I had opportunities to keep playing. And so I only had those maybe 48 hours to think, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to quit playing, or are you going to keep giving it a go? And I've never thought about not playing, so I thought I could play someplace. In those days, your only other option was Canada, and I would have even gone there because I love football.
As they say, though, Coach LeBeau, everything happens for a reason, right? And you end up as a part of this legendary secondary, Dick Night Train Lane, yourself, and you guys caught the ball more than the opposition sometimes from their own quarterback. 62 interceptions in 14 seasons with the Lions. You went to the Pro Bowl 3 times. You're still tied 10th all-time in interceptions, which this many years later is remarkable, the number of times you guys were able to turn the ball over.
Yeah, we had great defenses in the 60s with the Lions. And this is an interesting little sidebar here, really, Chris. They started keeping official statistics about 62, I think. Okay. Which was right in the wheelhouse of our best Detroit Lion defenses. And when I got to looking at the stats, I've always been very stat-minded. Of the 08 Pittsburgh Steelers defense, I had to go all the way back to the 60s, which is when they began keeping all those records, to find numbers anywhere near what they did. Yeah. And that was kind of an eye-opener that it's just not going to happen again. When we played in the early 60s, Lombardi was the king of the roost, of course. Right. And his theory, they ran the football 65% of the time, and the NFL teams they follow success, and it was pretty much 65% run, 35% pass in the game in that era. Today's game is probably more like 70% pass and 30% run, as you know. So there's 2 things there. Number one, they weren't going to pile up as many yards running the ball as they do today throwing the ball. Mm-hmm. And that makes I think the numbers even more impressive from the 08 defense. Absolutely. Because you got to go back to the 60s to get numbers that even come close to what they did. But another thing about that secondary that we had, with only throwing the ball 35% of the time, the ball wasn't flying around all over the field. We didn't get that many opportunities to pick it off,
right. Well, that's an interesting link you make there. You talk about 2008, looking back to find some of the comparable numbers and having to go all the way back to those Lions defenses of the 60s. In particular, those final 7 regular season games of 2008, you guys forced 17 turnovers. Is there a direct link, you think, whether consciously or not, between how you played the game for the Lions in the 60s and how you coached your defenses to play the game in the 90s, 2000s, and following?
I think we're all a product of our environment and the things that we've been exposed to as we develop our own personal philosophies, whatever walk of life we're in, whether it's broadcasting or playing football or being an engineer and building roads or bridges or whatever it is. You get your own ideas. And there's no doubt we were very much a pressure defense in Detroit. Over the years, again, keeping my statistics, I found that the most, game impacting plays came when the defense was actually in a pressure type of a defense. So I began to look at the other side of the coin, and then it was also one of the riskiest defense because a lot of the bigger plays that the offense would pile up would be against blitzes that went bad. And so that got me thinking about a safer way to blitz, and just so you didn't have everybody out there playing man-to-man to steal the extra advantage of an extra rusher.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of what led to the zone blitz, really. But it was, it was definitely my personal experience of playing, just like my coaching. I always thought I could teach any of the kids to cover better because I've learned so much. I learned the hard way about getting beat, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to stay in coaching, because if you retire after 14 years of playing, who in the hell do you share the knowledge that you've gained through all those football games if you're not coaching somebody else? So I definitely wanted to coach defensive backs.
Coach, it's amazing. It's like you're reading my notes right now through the phone, because I was going to ask you next about jumping right into coaching following your retirement. And when you do that, when you jump, I believe it was Philadelphia, correct, as a secondary coach?
That's correct. Mike McCormick, who I met with the Cleveland Browns. So that was another plus that getting drafted by Cleveland helped me. Got me my first job in the NFL.
There you go. Are you immediately, towards the end of your playing career and the beginning of your coaching career, is that, you talk about developing the mentality of the zone blitz. Are you starting to have those thoughts then? You're starting to develop it in your head at that point?
No, I was aware of the effect that pressure had on offenses. And it was later on when I got into coordinating and setting up statistical goals for the defense that I got into the intricacies of yardage gain and yards per snap and things of that nature, which are the hidden pluses of good defense, that I got to looking at a safer way to blitz. That's where the zone blitz came from. But we played one of the great Green Bay teams. We beat them on Thanksgiving. One of the games that contributed heavily to this appeal of two football teams playing nationally that didn't have a geographic connection with the nation, and shooting up football ratings or viewer ratings on the TV schedules, which helped popularize professional football. The other one was the championship first sudden death game, Colts and the Giants. Amici scored, and United took them down the field in the overtime. So those two games got people thinking. Before that time, it was all area. The home team was broadcast and went to their various geographic locations, but there was almost no national television of football, bowl games maybe, in colleges. So we beat Green Bay on Thanksgiving Day, which the Lions were always on TV Thanksgiving Day. Originally it was just us, and the viewer numbers on that game were the thing I think that got everybody thinking that people love football. At any rate, I think we sacked Starr about 12 or 13 times. I remembered coming off the field after the game, and I looked at my uniform, and it looked like I'd just been through pregame warm-ups. There wasn't hardly any marks on me. We just controlled the line of scrimmage so much, and I thought, well, that's not a bad way to play defense. I mean, they had a great team, but they just couldn't do anything because we swarmed them. And I always had believed in pressure, and actually playing a corner position, you weren't overly fond of what you had to do when it was pressure, because your nearest help was about 20 yards away, and you were going all over the field with it. Nonetheless, I determined that for my mind it was better to keep the quarterback a little uncomfortable.
Before we dive into your time with the Steelers and the 2008 team in particular, one more note on your time leading up to that, and it's 1984. Sam Weiss takes over in Cincinnati as the head coach, and you're hired as defensive coordinator. He was known as a great character, but also a great guy and a great football mind. What kind of influence was he on you, and What you talk about starting to develop the ideas of the zone blitz once you became a coordinator. When you started to see the talent available to you on those late '80s defenses in Cincinnati, is that where you start to dream up ideas like that?
The thing that I'll always be most grateful to Coach Weiss for, he was an innovative guy. You know, he was really one of the first no huddle guys, and he just kept them spread out and didn't huddle. And we had to go through a heck of a learning process. We had a tremendously talented offensive squad, but you can imagine the first guy going down that mode of offense. Nobody got in the huddle. They just all went out there, and the quarterback would be barking out a couple things, and away they would go. And you're only as good on any team endeavor, but particularly in football, because there's 11 men out there. Everybody got to be on the same page, and everybody's got to be running the same play. But Sam was willing to go through the ups and downs of getting that system, because he could see the end result of it was going to be a problem for the defense. Well, he being my boss, when I went to him with the idea of rushing this little guy and that little guy and dropping two of the big guys back, there's most coaches, I think, particularly of that era, would have said, "You're crazy. We're not going to do anything like that." When you become a head coach, you can try it then.
Right.
But Sam said, "Yeah, let's take a look at it," because he was open to more innovative things. And I must admit, I've felt many times that I was going off the diving board into the deep end, and somebody forgot to put the water in the pool, because there was a lot of questions that would come up, and I would say, I got to figure that one out.
The first time you're asking Tim Crumry to drop into a curl zone, you start wondering what you're doing, right?
Yeah, Crumry was too good at what he did. I never asked him to drop. I let him spy the back every now and then. But I didn't want to take him off the line of scrimmage.
Let's go to 1992 then. And Bill Cowher is hired to replace Chuck Noll here in Pittsburgh as the Steelers head coach. What was the connection there that brought you to his staff with the Steelers?
Well, there was none, except that I had been coaching in that division for 12 years with the Bengals. I knew the division. I knew all the players in the division. And when I interviewed, that was the salient point that I could make, because I didn't know Bill. Bill was the youngest head coach when they hired him at that time, I think, in the league. And so we weren't of the same era as players. I didn't really know Coach Cowher. So I think the only connection I had was being in that division with all the experience I had with all the personnel in that. And, by that time I had developed a pretty good body of experience from coaching and playing in the National Football League. That's what I interviewed on.
Was there sort of an instant connection, though, in that he appreciated the idea of creating discomfort for the quarterback in the backfield? And as you've talked about and elaborated here at great length, that was exactly what you wanted to do. Make the person with the football in their hands uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think Bill liked that. He wasn't so crazy about the idea of zone blitzes. But Bill was a great head coach. He could make the simplest installation meeting sound like an oration. He was great with the team. And again, there's an old saying in coaching: you don't want to coach the position that the head coach played, and you definitely don't want to coach as a coordinator if the head coach was a coordinator in your area. So, well,
you've pulled that off multiple times now, though. What foundation was laid, in your opinion, that spun forward years later?
Well, on that first staff, there was Coach Dom Capers, who's still coaching in the league, tremendously talented coach. Myself, Marvin Lewis was on that staff, who had a great coaching career, and, of course, Coach Cowher, who's in the Hall of Fame as a coach. So there was a tremendous amount of cerebral football power in that coaching room when we would start talking about defense and where to go with it. One of the common denominators for my defenses over there, for this, I think Kevin Colbert and the scouting staff for the players that that they produced and drafted for us. Most of our guys were drafted by the Steelers. Very, very few were free agent acquisitions. But on that particular team, to be more direct in answering your question, Kevin Green and Greg Lloyd were the outside linebackers. And you talk about bookends that are going to give an offensive pass protecting group problems. And the stuff that we were doing kind of evolved around having particularly skilled guys in those areas, again, to create pressure and havoc for the offense. And followed by them, I had Mark Hagens and Joey Porter.
Right.
And Jason Gilden was in there. Gilden was a great outside rusher. And then on the 08 defense, which we're talking about specifically, we had Harrison and Woodley, who were as good as any two that ever played. But when you start looking at that group of rushers, I think, I don't know, Kevin had something like 160 sacks because he played so long, He's third at all-time NFL. It lets you expand your thoughts a little bit about what you could do with the other guys because you were going to get pressure from those outside rushers, and the offense was all time trying to figure out ways to slow them down. And if you're going to rob from Peter to pay Paul, you got to attack Paul, and then we go to work on the inside a lot of times. So it worked to our advantage, the greatness of those outside rushers.
As we move from 2005, and you mentioned Joey Porter, he moves on the following year. Coach Cower retires the following year. This young, energetic defensive coordinator, Mike Tomlin, comes in to take over. Another young head coach that you're working with. And also, in the year or two that follows after he comes in, you're adding some of those names that you just mentioned. Lamar Woodley's drafted in the second round of 2007. Lawrence Timmons in the round before him. Willie Gay a few rounds later. So there's all this transition and all these young guys that come in, but the same foundation that we just spoke about is still in place. How does it all mesh? How does it all come together? Do you remember the first time you sat down with Coach Tomlin and what that conversation was like and just how you decided you guys were going to be able to mesh everything that existed already and was so successful with all of the new stuff rolling in?
Well, I think that was the common denominator there for me with Mike. I didn't know Mike. It was very similar to the situation with Bill.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never met Bill, and I'd never met Mike. I didn't know him at all. And both of them had been limited as defensive coordinators. That is in terms of time of experience.
Right.
I think Bill was maybe 2 years at Kansas City with Marty Schottenheimer. And I don't know, Mike, how many years had he been at Minnesota as a coordinator, but not too many. By this time, I had a lot of years of coordinating, so I was, let's put it this way, I wasn't sending out any of my dry cleaning when Coach Tomlin got the job, because I didn't know him, and I knew he was a four down lineman guy.
Right.
And we were 3-4. What I had predominantly going there, I think we'd led the league about 3 out of the last 4 or 5 years, I think,
mm-hmm.
on defense.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ended up, we led it about 8 out of 10, I think, in total there for that one run that we had with that bunch of guys. So, I mean, there's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
I bet I still didn't know because I didn't know Mike, and I knew he was strictly a 4-man defensive line. Well, in my mind, it doesn't make any difference whether you're going to play 4-man down line, 3-man, 2-man. It's all defense, You got 11 guys, that's the max, and all they can put out there on the other side is 11 guys. So defense is defense. I never got a chance to express that argument with anybody because I didn't get an interview with Mike. When the news came out that they named Mike the new head coach, I thought, well, Coach LeBeau, you may not be coaching in Pittsburgh.
Does Coach Tomlin come in then, Coach LeBeau, and say to you, hey, you're Dick LeBeau and this defense is great. I'm handing you the keys. Or do you guys sit down and have a conversation? How does that go? Because I think that's one thing Steeler fans look back on that era in particular of Steeler football and say, man, how did this young hotshot head coach come in and marry everything he wanted to do with what this established, highly successful defensive coordinator was doing?
We never had that conversation. Shortly, while I was pondering my future, the phone rang, and it was Coach Tomlin. And he said, he just introduced himself to me. Of course, I knew he was my new boss, And he said he was not going to make any changes on defense. So he told me right away, which I've always appreciated because, nobody's have to find a new job. And particularly the success that we'd had on defense there, we had some pretty daggone good defenses right there.
Quite the understatement there from Dick LeBeau. The first half of our conversation there focusing on everything leading up to the 2008 Pittsburgh Steelers defense and the run it went on. From his very beginnings in London, Ohio, up to the hiring of Mike Tomlin. In the second half of our chat with Coach LeBeau, we dive into that second year of Mike Tomlin's tenure with the Steelers, what the expectations were going into that year, and just what he saw on the level of greatness from guys like Troy Polamalu, James Harrison, Lamar Woodley, Casey Hampton. Go down the list, name them all. He'll do so, and he'll talk about that magical run to the Super Bowl 43 title. That next week right here on episode 2 of Oh Momma, a look back at the 2008 Black and Gold defense presented by South Hills Kia.